Okay, so we've got this really lovely kind of cooking up a storm, I think is the title for this one, but just lots of really lovely fresh ingredients. Just because it's really nice actually to kind of zone in and think about all the different tones and things that you get within one particular it's quite simply coloured like fruit or vegetable. Um, there are so many different tones in there, and we'll talk a little bit more about tone. And also, they're great to do a study of because the shapes and things are absolutely lovely. So we'll start to think about some of the contour lines and things that we can add, and we'll be talking quite a lot about the shadow, some of the mid tones that we can put in there, which I'll go through in a bit more detail. And everything, and all those lovely highlights and what kind of colours we can explore for that. So we're going to really explore colour today, whilst we're getting back, kind of getting into this. So really easily, and if you've got something in front of you, then you can literally go and actually do that. If you're working from one of the pictures, all of these pictures will scale up. So if you get the line in the middle, in the right place, it will all scale up to an A size picture. Paper size. So, and that makes it really helpful. So you can be working on an A5 or an A3 or even an A1 and it'll scale up because all I'm doing to make it easier is to put just a 4/4 grid on there. Now, when I'm drawing this on my actual paper or canvas, you can do it. You'll need to do it really lightly. Now, I'm going to have to do it nice and deeply so that you can see it. But the reason for you doing it nice and lightly is it can scrub up under that lighter colours and make your paint a little bit muddy actually, with acrylic. So you just do yours nice and lightly, and I'll make this nice and bright so you can see it. And then really, all we need to be thinking about is how we use, how we can kind of like keep the flow of just drawing some of the fruit, but make sure kind of proportionally it's more accurate, and it will really help us because actually if you find this is helpful for you, you can apply it to pretty much anything that you do really. And it just makes life a little bit easier and makes things makes you be a bit more successful. So I'm just going to start out with just this little contour there, and all I mean, it's not even that fancy. It's just curves and lines. That's contour. So I'm just going to pop this in. Now, the reason I don't put like loads and loads of a huge grid on here is I think we can lose the flow. Personally, for me, can lose the flow of actual the drawing side, and it's really good because every time we put like a curved line or something in, we tend to remember it quite well. So if we're doing lots of like little broken shapes, we don't really remember that. Like we're kind of exercising our memory muscle. So it's just quite nice to do that. So I'm bringing this round. Obviously that pepper's coming over the top there. But I'm just bringing this round and I can pretty much see, whereabouts this pepper comes to within this quarter. But I'm actually not, I'm keeping it moving just because I think it'll help me remember the shape the next time I come to do one. I'm keeping that flow going a bit. So I'm just coming round this side. And all these lines can be movable. There is no such thing as a line that has to stick. So quite often, I'm just bringing this right round the back and kind of going over where I think that one's going there. And you can see I've just stuck to the outside line there. I can put the other ones in a moment. There we go. So we've got a general idea, but more often than not, I think when we actually start painting, we do shift lines and things like that with the paint, and that's absolutely fine to do so. So yeah, so don't worry about it being like it's not rigid that at all. We can kind of move lines, paint over the top of them with acrylic, which is fantastic. It's such a forgiving medium, it's great. So all I am going to pop in here a little bit is I'm going to just do a bit of kind of guesswork. I'm going to put this up the middle because I'm seeing here that there's this kind of section down the middle here, and then bringing this curve over the top. I'm kind of keeping half an eye out where the you know, where am I within this quarter each of these cons, but I'm not being absolutely exact as we need a bit of room for creativity as well. And then we've got another one over here. Over this side, haven't we? And that one comes quite well over. I'm noticing this line comes, contour line comes quite well over. So my lines are really sketchy because the thing with pre-drawing when you're doing acrylic is we pretty much just need a base because we'll be painting right over it. So there's really no point in spending hours and hours, you know, mapping it out because it'll just get painted over. If you want to kind of work on one thing, I'm not going to put too much detail in. I think I ended up just painting over this anyway, but I might just pop a little bit just so I can see how far up that comes. And then we've got this lovely area of the pepper, haven't we, at the base, which is fabulous. Or, you know, tomatoes as well, you know, this got that similar kind of a thing going on there. So I'll just put just a little sketch. It can be that simple, really. So then I'm just going to continue. So what I tend to say is, because people are like, where, I don't know where, I'm not sure where to start. I tend to find the one or two or three biggest items and start with that. So I'll go into this pepper now that's big as well, I think, at the front here. And I'm looking at whereabouts it comes up here. Because we can use, you know, even within these, like say it's most of it's in this quarter, we can kind of go, right, that's halfway, so it comes just a bit over. So we're just using it to help a little bit there. And then it comes all the way down the side here. Overlaps with this one, which is what we saw earlier. And again in here. And then the next one comes there. And I'm just looking at where it comes, how it comes there. So I'm looking, thinking it comes bottom of this pepper. It's coming down here. So got like almost a heart shape there, haven't we, on the top of this pepper there. And then we can see there's another section, but you know, even here we'll probably end up painting over that because we need to start with a base colour somewhere. So I never get too attached to these drawings at all. There we go. Now if you want to put your stalk on, you can do. Again, it might help just to see where to not paint over in the background, but I mean, you can actually just paint this straight over the background anyway. So we're just kind of following those little curves with these contour lines. And then obviously we've got the last pepper, which makes it so much easier just to pop that one in. And the same with any arrangement, any still life arrangement. You know, if you've got two, you can then see between the two where the third one fits, which makes that much easier as well. So, but obviously this is much smaller, it's in the background, isn't it? So if it helps to just pop like a little outside line first without doing anything, just so you can see where the edge is going to finish, that's sometimes helpful, you know, where part of this section is. It's kind of lovely and got a lovely shape, hasn't it, this one? So we can just start to pop a few little interesting lines there. I'm just going to move that because I need it a bit wider. And I've just noticed I've brought mine out too far actually. This is why I said you don't worry about anything, you know, being too definite, because we just shift and change things. So the more we look at them, the more we adjust. And a lot of it is literally just memory muscle and practice and an observation. When we first look at something, it's the first time we've done it in a while or whatever. We can just change it. And just pop a little bit of detail in here. But again, there's lots of little lovely contour lines and we're just following the direction of them. There's a stalk in there. There we go. If you want to get rid of your grid, that's fine. The thing with it is not just as long as it's you get all of the bits off it, that's the most important thing. Because you don't want those getting in with your acrylic paint, or it makes them a little bit textured. It makes your paint a bit textured. So that's not ideal. So make sure you've got it off. I mean, you can leave it there. If it's very faint, it'll be fine. It's just whether it annoys you more than anything. I think sometimes people are just like, oh, I just want to see my pic. I want to see my paint. I want to see my picture. You know, where everything's going. Yeah. So just kind of popping that down really is absolutely fine. Okay, so once we've done that, we've got to obviously decide, do you want to put a background on or not? If you don't, that's absolutely fine. You can just like bring this study, you know, a little bit more into focus. I'm going to put a background in just because I fancy a little bit of colour. Now, background wise, you can go for anything. You can go for something that's a little bit of a contrasting colour, like, so we've got all these warmer colours, so you could actually go for a contrasting colour, like a cooler one, so something on the blue spectrum, whereas this is all like the warm yellows and reds. Even the pepper's got quite a bit of yellow in it. You know, so that's one thing. Or you could use something called a restrictive palette, where you go for a similar tone to the tones in there already, and so it's all quite, you know, there's not too many colours in your palette. Or you could go for a real neutral, you know, something like I don't know, like a brown or a grey or an ochre or something like that. So it's entirely up to you. I've decided I'd like to go for like a blue based one, just because I really fancy that Mediterranean. I think it's calling me. So I've got a couple of blues on here, but which obviously you can, you know, whatever colour you're drawn to for backgrounds, then go for it. You could go for any of those colours that I suggested. I've got two here. I've got a cerulean blue, which is a very kind of like almost more of like on the turquoisey spectrum. So it's kind of quite a warm blue. And then I've got ultramarine, which is, you know, just it gives us kind of a baby blue when we mix it with a tint. So I'm going to use a little bit of that, but I'm also going to have some cerulean on. So I'm just going to move this across. Now you can just use just your small paintbrush to mix it. It's not, you don't necessarily need it. I'll just get used to doing it because I'm mixing big amounts of paint. So, and then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of clean off that. I'm going to add what we call white, which just means basically we're adding a tint. So when I say, oh, you could mix a tint, it's just any colour mixed with white. So again, it doesn't need to be like fancy language or anything. So I'm going to go in with a lightish tint as a contrast for this background. I'm also going to have an area that's a little bit darker in some areas and an area that's also a bit lighter. So even if we use one colour, to make our backgrounds a little bit more interesting, so I'm going to make this tint up, but I'm going to put ultramarine blue in. See how different they are. And again, it's like, sometimes it's just nice to explore colour. I'm going to add a little bit of this cerulean to it though, give a bit more balance through the painting. So the key to kind of getting a good, nice blend with your background is mixing it all up so it's all ready at the same time. I'm also going to add just a very light tint here for just adding a bit more of a lighter area in the background as well, so it's not all the same. I'm just mixing it up. So mix those three colours. And then making sure that you've got enough water in there. So I'm just going to use a nice flat brush. The reason I've gone in with a flat brush is it's great for, again, it's really kind of a good blend because you kind of can blend the edges into one another. So when we've put enough, mixed enough water in, I'm just going to do that now actually. So you can use like a little pipette or something, or you can just add a little bit of water. So ideally with the acrylic, what you need for a background, if you're wanting to blend it smoothly together without having texture in it, then it needs to feel a bit like butter that's being left out. you know, when you leave it out and it gets to that room temperature, not so it's like runny or anything like that. That's ideally the texture you want so that it kind of, you can blend it together in the background. So I'm just going to make sure, also you can test your colours. If you've got a little bit of tester paper, you know, that's, as we're going along, that might be really helpful. When you're testing them, it'll give you an idea as well of how thin or thick it is. So that'll be good. So I'm just going to go in with this other mid-colour cerulean. And what I'm testing for whilst I'm doing it is the butteriness of it and how it applies to my paper as well, not just the colour of it. Let's try this one. I'm just getting a bit of a rinse off in between. And then I've got this darker colour. So I'm feeling like that's buttery enough and it's going to kind of cover quite nicely. So what can happen if it's really thin, it goes on a bit more like a watercolour. And then it's difficult to, you can blend it, but it's a thin blend. So the beauty of acrylic paints, one of the ways we can use them is we can kind of put them on quite thickly. So I'm just going to go in with this kind of mid-tone and you'll see I'm actually really quite loading that up. So there's a couple of millimetres on the edge of this flat brush. So I've got a bit of the other colour in there as well, because you can pop a little bit, half each if you want, of another colour on. And I'm just kind of going to go in side to side, backwards and forwards mainly, because once I start popping this on nice and thickly, it gives me a really good base to start to do these blends. So I am going to go over the edge of this pepper. So you can, what you can do is you can bring the background into the top of the pepper if it helps. Just in case you move your pepper a bit, then you'll always then make sure that you're overlapping your colour over the top so you don't have a gap between it, because that can look a little bit false. So I've got plenty on my brush, that's the trick. There we go. And again, I'm not worrying about going over the top of my my other one. So I'm just bringing in a bit of that darker blue as well. And because I've got plenty on, it starts to blend quite nicely. We don't end up with like patchy colours. Now, sometimes it's fine. It's just a little bit, this is just like a slightly different technique for blending as opposed to creating texture on the background. So just kind of have a go, enjoy getting those lovely colours. Just move them back, move your brush backwards and forwards. There's plenty of paint on there is the key. If we don't pop quite enough on, sometimes feels like it's sticking or it's dragging. So if it's dragging and it's really difficult to move, you might just need to add just a little bit more, a touch of water, but it can also be a touch more paint as well. So if you try those two things. So I'm just kind of going along the edge. I'm not worrying if I go over those lines into the pepper, as I said, there's a reason for that, so that we make sure we're covering it all really well. So that if we move our lines, which often we do, we've got space too. But it's a really nice bit of the process is that when the paint actually starts to go on. And then if there's any areas as well that you want to like add in a slightly lighter one, I'm going to just bring it into the top. Now it looks like that looks like it's really obviously sticking out at the minute, but again, if I just bring in a little bit of the other colour that I'm using as well, it will, in no time at all, it will blend in with what other colours we've got in there. And I can just bring it in just a little bit, just so it's kind of sticking in. And just keep moving that backwards and forwards so it feels really comfortable for you. And then the other thing is, if you're doing this and you're finding that actually it feels more comfortable to go up and down and it's really unnatural side to side, then do that. Because I know I'm showing you one way. but actually it's if you're going against your natural creating kind of motion, it's not quite as enjoyable. It's really important to be able to get that balance of being able to kind of enjoy your brush strokes and let your hand kind of guide you as well, because what we do with our hand just really does come out very naturally. We don't realise we're doing it either. So when you're happy with what you've got there, you know, you're happy with your tones and your blends, then you can just leave it to dry. There's a little bit in the middle there. Forgot about that. Go over that a bit anyway. Okay. Now it often looks a bit patchy at this phase anyway, so don't worry too much. If it feels, you can always just give yourself a bit of distance from it. It's quite important to do that. Because when we're doing something that's quite a lot of, you know, layers on it, it can feel quite intense. But when you hold it back like you would look at a picture on a wall, it is much nicer in terms of it looks softer. And we don't look at any artwork so close up anyway, do we really? It's usually on the wall. Okay, well I'm going to stop there because I'm kind of happy with my where my background is for the moment. And it's got a little bit of variation in there, so it's, you know, just a little bit different. So I'm going to dry those brushes off and make sure, because I'm going from blue to warms, that between the brushes, between your the tip and the base of your brush here, just make sure you can get it all out, a bit of tissue or something, because it does hang about as acrylic in the base of the brushes, and then it can make your other colours quite muddy. So I'm going to save this blue, this water that I've used though, and use it if I'm doing any kind of really dark colours. I'll use it for that and keep the other water clear. So, yeah, there we go. And that's, you know, this is just a fairly simple background that we've got in there. It just gives a little bit of colour. So I'm going to move on to going for this red colour first. Now, red, the tomatoes, the chilies, the peppers, you'll notice if you start to really look at them, that they are of quite a few different tones of red. Now, what I mean by that is, so if I just go in with a Cajun red here, that's one tone, that's one shade of red there. It's quite warm. So there are all sorts of different reds. So this red, what we would say is it's quite warm. It's Acadian red's is more yellow in it, so it's quite a nice warm red. Then you've got a kind of more on the mid spectrum. You've got like, you know, pillar box red, those kinds of colours that are really, you know, your real classic reds. And then you've got the cooler reds, like Alizarian crimson, which is actually quite what we call a cool red because it's got more blues in it. Now I can get the same effect just by adding, so I've just done that there, I'll mix it here. If I add a bit of ultramarine blue to it, we can create something that's a much more cool based red there. And it's just trial and error how much to add. So if I do that, because actually when you start to look at some of those, some of the shades and things in here, so some of the tones, we've got like a warmer tone and we've got a cooler tone in here. So it's tempting to want to think, oh, it's in the shade, we'll put grey in, but actually grey is quite a flat colour. So if we can use darker tones of the same colour to get the shadow in, which are cooler, then it will create that kind of start to help us create that depth, and that shadow will help us create like the feeling that it's going down or backwards. So they're quite important to think about these different tones. So we've got those kinds of tones. And then you may even have, some of your reds may be even lighter. So you may even be having some of those medium tones. There may even be like some yellowy red ones where you're mixing where you think, oh, it's really, I can actually see some almost yellowy tones in there. So you could try a bit of Cajun red, yellow if you've got it, or whichever yellow you've got, that's fine. And then that again, that's a bit needs a bit more painting, a bit more thin. Will give us like a really light toned red there. And then we can go even lighter. So the way we probably go in is putting like the base tones in first with this red here. We'll be looking at going for a normal base. So things like your tomatoes will be a warmer. And then we'll pop any shadow sides, anywhere where it's going downwards, or you see where you get like where they get the dent of the pepper, or it might be like the underside of the tomato that's right underneath, that's in the shadow bit, or maybe some of the top of it that goes inwards, down here. So we're just looking really carefully and observing those different tones. And then eventually we'll pop those down and then the shadows, and then we'll start to pop in any other lighter and bright. So for example, you may find you've got this kind of a much lighter colour. You may even end up, I'll just swap my water over actually, otherwise I'm going to end up with blue in it. You may even end up with, for example, like almost a peachy tone. So you could go in with a bit of cadmium red, bit of cadmium yellow, or a bit of yellow, whichever one you've got. So again, want it fairly light. So because the red is quite an intense colour, it will take over a bit. So you might need more yellow. And then a little bit of white. So I'm just trying small amounts of this, mixing it. So that makes a really interesting, it's kind of a light peach colour, but when you start to look at the tomato, the highlights and things, you may end up with that, and that's got a tint in it. And then you may end up with a really light tint with hardly any of that colour at all, but it's nearly all white. Quite often we want to go in with those top highlights with just a white. And actually, when we look, you think you compare it to the paper. Is it as white? Well, some of it might be, but some of it might not be. Some of it you might think, oh no, that's more pink. So we've got all of these different tones to play with to kind of create the shape. So if we get going with that, so let's look. So I've moved on to a nice round brush. I've gone for a bigger one to start with, just to get the colour on. So I'm going to go in with the pepper. So I'm just going to go in with making sure I've got a little bit of water in it. Not going to put too much in. I'll go straight in with this Cajun red for this one. Now, if you're doing the chili peppers, you might want to go in actually with a cooler toned red to start with as your base colour. You can even darken that cooler tone out with something like a violet, purpley colour to make it, even darker where you want to put because that even the chili will have a shadow side. And the reason we can put kind of blue tones in with those is it's really helpful for making it disappear, which I'll show you in a moment. There we go. I'm just following these contour lines again. Now I'm doing something at the minute just called blocking out. So I'm just blocking out big areas of colour. And what you can do is you can still use your brush. So this round brush, I'm just loading up the tip more than anything really. And I'm just loading up the tip and bringing those kind of contour shapes round like that, which is just quite helpful because what you can do if you want the texture in there is you can actually create lines in there. Now you don't have to, if you're wanting to keep it smooth, that's fine. Just some people love texture and they love to create all the lines and everything in there, and other people don't. And sometimes you might not even know that yet, which is absolutely fine. This is why exploring with your different brush marks is really important to see what it is that you prefer. Well, I've got to 2 areas here so far. And while I've got there, so I don't lose where I'm going. So if I now lay all of this out, I might think, where's the edge that I created before? So I'm going to go in, I'm going to mix up that blue tone, that darker tone, that cooler tone with some blue. and some red. But if you've got an Alizarian crimson or something that's quite dark, you could just go in, try explore using that, see what happens. I'm just going to test that again. There we go. So it is quite dark, but it is actually when we look. So I am going to look at where it's darker. It's feeling kind of dark around this edge. Now, the reason for doing it whilst it's still wet as well is that if you want it to blend a bit, you can. It'll just blend in like that. So I'm not taking it everywhere, but I'm taking it up a little bit where I can see, where I think it looks a bit darker. Definitely actually over this side here as well. Almost that whole section feels that. So this is great for just really starting to observe and look and explore and see what we can see with the colours. It's fabulous to have time just to really focus in on things that we just don't. We're so busy in our day-to-day lives. We just don't have a chance to really look at things. And I think, things like just a simple fruit and veg is fascinating when you look at the colours. And pop that in there. And at the bottom, I'm feeling like it's dark. So all you can do is just look and then see what you think. And it doesn't matter, not everything has to be accurate. It's really about a journey and into kind of just having a go and just discovering these things as you go. Because the more you start to look, the more a little world of observation unfolds where you start seeing things you never saw before. It's fabulous. So I'm just going to go between here now. It's darker. So we'll start to get a contrast between the shadow and the light and the brighter ones already, and that will make those go in because dark, cool colours recede, appear to be going backwards, which is what we need. That's what really helps our work to become 3D, but we've only got 2 bits of it at the moment. So it's still going to be flat, even though we're getting a bit of shape on there. So we still need the other highlights and things and the warmer tones to make it pop forwards as well, to get that whole 3D element in there. So I'm going to flip back to my other colours. So now I've got a little bit more in there. I feel I can come away from that. Because I'm not going to lose where I am now. I can see the sections. So sometimes we can just do that just to help us a bit. So I can see already that I want to take this out a little bit further than I did to start with. And this is what I was saying about adjusting and shifting all the time. It is really good practice to get into and not thinking I've got to stick with this at all, because we don't, like, if it's not quite there, fine, just move it. I'm just bringing that down a little bit. Now, if you've got like, wanting to go into a bit more detail with it and it's a bit fine, I just go down to a smaller round brush, because you can get really in, get that tip used. Yeah. And put that in there. So we're just exploring these colours. And then again, because I've got my colour mixed up, I'm going to go in with this darker colour in between. And again, that will help. That will help put in some of the shadow. It's learning as well how far do I go with the contrast, and sometimes we'll put it on and it might feel too dark, but that's fine. You can always lighten it up. And sometimes we think, oh, it could be darker, and that's fine. With acrylics, you can just go back over the top. It's fantastic. So I'm going to go back in here. Look where else I need to add this. I might need to add this a bit slightly darker colour in there. There's a bit over there, quite a bit. And then I'm going to pop in, go back in with my other red. Keep layering those two colours together while they're, damp so that we can easily, they're really movable. I'm just going to blend in whilst that's wet these two colours because there's a little bit of a divide there. So I'm just going to bring a bit of each colour into each section until I'm happy with it. It's kind of not, too stripy or whatever. The side. And again, I'm looking at tones, which is a bit more brighter. These seem to be, don't they, kind of the ones sticking up a catch in the light and tend to be a bit brighter along this top. So I'm quite happy going with this warm cadmium red in here in the top. And that's the same, like if you look at the tomatoes and the peppers, you'll have some really different tones. Depending on what you've got. Where the light's catching it. And what's next to it sometimes as well, because sometimes you get a big shadow cast by another fruit or vegetable in a group. And sometimes even the reflection of a colour of another fruit or vegetable ingredient. So now you see we've just done the shadow and the midtones, and there's a good reason for that, because we tend try not to put the shadow on at the end, because it might flatten down everything that we've done. We want eventually the lightest and the brightest, then the lightest to be there, and then that shadow won't just come in and flatten everything at the last minute. So that's a good reason for getting your shadows in kind of now. Now, sometimes if we miss them out, we want to go in, we can just do that quite carefully. It's not the end of the world if we need to make it slightly darker or whatever. It's just a good practice to get into. And bringing this contour line out and making it a bit wider. Do the same. And that's the beauty. Once we get into really close observational work like this, and really getting into that lovely flow, we start to really see lines and things in so much more detail than we do when we first kind of just trying to sketch something out. So that's really nice to do that. So I'm just going to take a pause for a moment there and just see how everybody's getting on. So I'm going to pop in the middle of my pepper now, just because I just want it's not to be floating around, and I want to kind of, it really helps with the segments as well to see where they are. So the same goes for the center of the pepper here, and this is very similar with the tomatoes as well, and the top of the chili peppers, where you get some areas are quite dark because they're sinking down, and some are lighter. But I'm just going to go in with one mid-tone here to start with, and just try and create that kind of, it's almost like a bit of a spiderweb shape at the bottom. I'm just going in with a mid-tone green here. When I say mid-tone green, it's not a really dark green and it's not a really light green. So there are different kinds of shades of green we can use. With the things like, this is kind of a leafy green. I'll just move it across so you can see actually. This is a leafy green, more of a leafy green, like sap green. Chrome green can be similar. And then we've got some really dark green. So this one's dark green, and you might see it called Phthalo or Hooker's green. That's a really dark one. But again, I'll show you how to make a dark green just from green if you haven't got the darker one as well, or you can just use your darker green. But we can add a bit of brown or a bit of ultramarine blue to make that darker in places. So we can warm up or cool down a green. And then we've got the very bright green, very light greens. So it might actually be called green light, or yellow green is another one. And that's a much warmer, brighter green. Just going to move that down a bit. It's got more yellow in it, that one. So I'm kind of staying away from that for the moment. I'm just getting this in the base. But I am just kind of following. Oops, it's not quite going in the right place there. You can if something goes in the wrong place, you can just either paint over it with the original colour or just kind of move it off quickly with a bit of tissue. So I'm just following where these bits go, you know, where the edges go near to each of those sections that's kind of dipping down. And then I'm going to go in, I'll go in with a little bit of, so that's got a bit of this Hooker's green in. So I'm just kind of popping that. So again, this will make it feel like it's going downwards, this dark green. If you haven't got dark green, I'll show you how to mix one of those up. So you can literally just get your sap green or your kind of mid-tone green here. And you could add some ultramarine blue or some cobalt blue, something like that. Makes a very bluey green, which is fine. It's cool, so again it'll be shadowy, so we can pop that. And again, it's exploring this colour, just having a go with it and seeing what you think. Well, that's obviously much darker now, and that's just been done by adding some ultramarine blue in there. But if you already have a dark green, you know, you don't need to do this. And then, or you can use a bit of your mid-green, sap green, or whatever it is, and then, or add, and add brown. So it just gives you a slightly different tone, but again, it'll still give you a dark green, sorry. You can pop into those places that you most need them. Where you see like underneath here, where that stalk's going to come out, that's quite dark, isn't it? It's quite shadowy there. So then what I would do is the actual stalk is much brighter and lighter. So I'm going to go in with but probably as a base, I'm going to actually mix a bit of sap green. Now, if you've got a yellow green or like a lighter green, then by all means use that. I'm just going to lighten this up and make it a yellow green just by adding some of that Cajun yellow that we've got out, or you could add lemon yellow. It doesn't really matter. Just have a play, or just go in with the colour that you've already got. That's fine. And then I'm just going to put that on as a base. I'll just test it first, I think. Okay, I'm going to go a bit lighter than that, I think. A bit more yellow in there. There we are. A bit lighter. Does help sometimes when we test it, just because it gives us a bit of an idea. So I'm really loading my brush up now, and I'm going to pop in. Look at where I'm going to put that. Plenty of paint on to cover over. And then I can start to put in the top of that pepper in there. And then we've got, a bit of the base of the pepper there as well. So it starts to feel a bit more pepper-like at this point. And then here we go. So, again, are there any shadowy bits on there? Do you need a slightly darker green? Well, usually, yes, it's usually underneath where the shadow side is, so the bit that's facing usually downwards and not catching the light, you can just add a little bit of a green, like a darker green on there. I just have a little explore. So this is really like, we're just looking now in more detail. Where can we see any shadow? There's a little bit of shadow actually over this back bit here. And then also, I want to make sure I've got the lighter areas on there as well. So I'm going to go in, try a bit of yellow here. Just try that over the top and see what that looks like. I'm actually going in this section, I'm putting a lighter or a brighter one on already. But I can, if that feels too intense, just mix a bit of green in with it, just to line it up a bit. Sometimes you need a bit of a brighter contrast. So you could just go and try a bit of bright yellow and see what happens. We need to see the difference between it so that these colours do their job that we need them to do, which is to, create these different shapes. So you'll see mine's quite linear, quite a few marks on there, but you can just go with what feels most comfortable with your brush. You might want to feel the need to kind of like smooth it out, that's fine. I do like putting on my own personal work quite a few lines and dots and things, so you do whatever's right for you. So again, there's a few little lighter bits in this base. I'm going to pop those in with a bright, I'm just going in with this bright yellow again in between. These are like bits that are kind of obviously sticking up on there, even in the base. So again, that's going to make a difference. And then the final thing in this pepper is to now look at any highlights we've got in there on top, what other colours can we see? Now I'm seeing over here, I'm seeing something that feels a bit yellowy, yellowy and red, bit peachy colour. So I'm just going to mix a bit there. I think the one I mixed earlier is actually dried up, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of white in and see what happens with this tint, see if it gives me the colour that I'm after. And you have, this way you just decide, do I need to put a little bit more yellow back in it or not? Or am I happy with that peach colour? Or do I need to put more white? Do I need it really light? So I'm just going to put a tiny bit more in. And I'm just going to go in and just put that where I feel I can see it on the top. So we're starting to kind of pop in. This isn't the lightest one on here. This is kind of the next warm shade that I can see. Next kind of lighter one, sorry. There's a little bit there. And if you're seeing texture on there, by all means pop in texture on there. There we go. And this becomes quite a bit of fun then. You start to think, oh, I'm enjoying just dabbing on these little amounts here. And then let's see, I'm looking now at some other, these that are much lighter. So I'm going to go in and put a much whiter tint in with that. I'm still going to use it. I'm still not going in with brightest white yet. Just putting more white in, seeing what happens. I might do the very final tint. There's only a couple on there that I probably put full on white on. So this is definitely brighter though. But compared to the red, even though that's a tint and it's quite pinkish, it will look quite bright on there, which is why I've not gone in with full white as well. So I'm just kind of just starting to, and all we can do is kind of dab on in a shape we think that we can see. So a lot of this, the shapes and things are just really just getting into to observing what we can see and enjoying that process of it, because it's really quite lovely once you start to look at the shapes. You think, oh, really nice. And then if there's anything else that you want to change at that point, like for example, I'm seeing more shadow down here than I've actually popped on, so I'm going to go back and just add a little bit more shadow over the top there on this side. I'm not going over the top of the bit I've done on the top, which I'm not flattening anything down there, so that will be okay. But I do need to want to pop a little bit more on there. And I may just go in and brighten up just with a bit of a slightly brighter red on the top here. So we can add those little pops. You know, and then we can do this whole thing with the other items that we've got on there. So I would just leave that there, do the next one, and then come back, because you can always come back to things and look at it as a whole, rather than making a decision. So again, so the yellow ones, I'm just going to go in with some yellow. I think I might need a new board soon. So again, when we're looking at the yellows and things, we might think some of them are brighter, some of these colours are brighter than others. I'm going to go in with a yellow that's already got a little bit of red in it, kind of, so it's a bit warmer, cooler, and then I'm going to brighten up over the top. Sometimes you can just choose a particular base to go in with, whatever you fancy. I'm just making sure I'm using clean water at this point. And I'm still going in with my bigger, rounder brush, just to kind of, it tends to be like that, using a bigger one to go in with. And again, I'm just kind of using using the brush to kind of pull around the contour of it. Sometimes that makes it actually, it's a good place to start. And the lovely thing is, once you've tried one and you're kind of getting used to the process, then you know the process for the next one, you know, popping in your medium tone in there, having a look at getting your shadows into place. A few of the lines I've already made. Now I may have to obviously layer my paint up a bit more thickly, because this colour is quite, it's not quite as opaque as some of the others. So I'll put a few layers on to make sure I've covered that blue. But it's often a good idea just to let it dry in the middle, because sometimes your paper can get a bit saturated and it starts to lift off, even with the papers. So it's just like letting things dry for a little bit. Yeah, just enjoy getting into the process of it. A little bit more paint. And then if you kind of like think I need to just get in a little bit more with the detail and make sure my lines are a bit neater, then just just go down a brush. A good kind of rule of thumb is the bigger ones for blocking out your big areas of colour, and then, you know, go smaller if you want to pop some more detail in. we start to have a look at what we can see. So I'm just going to pop some of these dark shadows in, and it's thinking, what colour do we go in with? Well, you could go in with a bit of a reddy colour or a bit of orange. You can make an orange with it. If you've got one, you can use it. I'm going to just kind of, while it's damp, because I can see that there's a bit of reflection off here, of this other pepper, but you might have that off, the side of might be doing a similar thing off the side of a chili or a tomato. So I'm just going to pop in, whilst it's damp anyway, I can kind of blend it a bit. Just this extra colour in here. Just along the inner edge there. And you can drag it quite nicely if you've already got the paint on there. It drags, it's quite easy to do, which it feels nice anyway. And then, down this side, I might actually just go for just a slightly flatter colour. So you may have, you may want to pop in, I don't know why, but I'm seeing a bit of pink in there, but this is the interesting thing, because we all see colours so differently. So I'll just see what that looks like. I may just drop in the tiniest bit of this cerulean blue here that I've been using. We could use the tiniest bit of ultramarine, and I know that's gone really too muddy. That's a no. This is why that was too much to drop in. Just because I know that this is the underside, it is going to be, but I feel that's it's too cool, that colour there. It's still a warm colour. If we want to do that, I'm going to drop in the smallest amount up to here. So these are the decisions we're making all the time whilst we're doing it. It's just like, oh, well, shall I put a bit of this colour in? Oh, I'm not sure. Keep testing those. So I think I'm probably getting a bit nearer now. Yeah, I'm happy with that now. A tiniest bit of that colour there. And that's all we can do, is just kind of pop it on and decide whilst we're doing it, am I happy with that colour? Is that the colour I want to put a bit more in there? Mm, just see. And then we'll just kind of pop in a few of these different colours where we think we can see them before we put any shadows on. This is kind of a shadow, but not quite as dark as the other ones, because we're on a light colour. So I have literally gone in with a bit of pinky colour with a little tiny bit of blue in it and a bit of yellow, just because that's what I'm seeing. And this is the thing, sometimes we can only go with what we're seeing, and like every artist will see things differently, which is brilliant, because that makes it a completely unique piece to you, which is what we want. So those are the colours that I've kind of gone in with for shadow, but I'm going to go in with this slightly darker, because I do need the shadow of where this is underneath and everything. So I'm going to probably go in with a bit of red and yellow together there and make it a bit brighter than it has been, so that we can get this line in. So I'm just, again, testing it. If you're not sure, just test it near to the colour that you're putting on and see if it works. So I think I'm happy with that. And here I'm just going in, because it's not a really dark colour, it's a darker colour of a similar tone. What we're not doing is we're not going in with black or brown, dark brown. We're going in with something on the similar colour spectrum, so it makes it softer. If we're going with a really hard line, it will make it look unnatural, because it's a fruit with no really dark colours in it. Fruit and veg, isn't it? With no really dark colours. And we can make it look quite false if we go in with really dark colours on that. Whereas if it was something like man-made, like a fence or something, then it's kind of like, well, yeah, actually, because that does it. But a lot of colours in nature don't have black in them. And we can end up just kind of killing that shape, that lovely softness that you're building up. And then there's this bit going down here. So all we've done is we've gone in with this slightly different colour. A little bit near the bottom as well. We're just looking for any more shadow lines that we might want to pop in. Before we kind of go in with any real brights, I think. That was a little bit of come in there. So then with the next, so it's the same process that we've just used for the other pepper, and then we're now looking at the bright colours we can add in. We've got a few of these other warmer tones, and now I'm going in like, is there any areas like here to me feels like where it's hitting, it's much brighter. So we can go in with we can lighten up that yellow. So if you've got a lemon yellow, that would be ideal. You could use a lemon yellow. If you haven't got lemon yellow or another colour that's quite bright or acidic, then you can just go in with a little bit of white in there, or you could use something called Naples yellow, which lightens things up. It's not quite as bright, it's a little bit flatter. Oops. So just make lots of it drawn. Just going to some white. So I'm making, I want to go with a bright, make this yellow bright. So I'm not going to put too much white or another colour in it first. These are much lighter, these real light spots, but I want this to pop against this particular yellow that we've used here. So it feels more vibrant as a yellow. If we put a lot of white straight into that, that will actually flatten it and make it more pastel-y. But we want to retain the brightness of that yellow. We're just making it more vibrant as opposed to very, very bright light. I'm popping that in. So sometimes if we put too much white in, we can take out the colour. That sounds a bit strange, I know, but again, it's quite bright down this end. So wherever you're seeing that, just have a go. It doesn't matter if it's not quite right. It's really fine. This is what it's all about. It's just trying, playing. And it's not about being right or wrong anyway. It's about you developing a preference and seeing what you're really happy with. So I'm just going in with a few strokes there, just brightening those areas up. And then I'm going to go in with these really light highlights here. I'm comparing this colour to the white, and I think actually in spots it really nearly is like that. But I'll go in with a very light tint, and then I'll put the final bright white on top, just in certain bits of it. So I'm just going to pop that in there. I'll build it up a bit down there. We're just looking at the shapes we can see. So another bit here. So this isn't the brightest of whites, although it looks it. And there, it will look even brighter in a minute when we put the actual white into place. And we're building that up like that. And I'm going to go in with a really pop of the brightest just on this down here, just on this edge here. So we can really build those bits up. And that's how we're building each of these shapes up. So we've got the contours, we're creating the depth with the shadow, and we're really getting that 3D effect by building up the areas of light where the light falls on it. And then again, we've got this one that goes kind of curls round, doesn't it? So it's quite light. I'm going to do that it's quite greeny again. So I'm going with this green. And then the yellow. More yellow than green, I think. But again, if you can test it, it really helps. You can start to see the difference in the colours. I'm just rolling it off my brush. It sometimes gets, your brush can get a bit cloggy with the paint at the bottom, so you'll give it a roll off and then, so we need to decide where we're starting from, following that curl round, and just having a little. Yeah. And again, obviously that's very 2D at the minute, but we'll get some of the contours just by adding in some of the darker greens like we've added before. So it's very shadowy there. And that gives a real sense that something's blocking the light and it's the front of that, it's the front of the pepper that's casting that shadow. So it's quite a good, like good. I'm following that round where I think it goes to. Oops. And then I'm just going to go in with a bit of yellow up here. That's what I'm seeing, just pop that in. So we're looking at each thing independently. This in here feels like it needs a bit of light now just to create a bit of, so we can see that that's the front. And then also a little tiny bit underneath. So I'm just looking at all the very small areas where we're now getting a bit of light on top. And we can pop those in accordingly. And then all of this makes the picture up of all different colours that we can see. And then we've got the last little one to do there. You know, whether you're doing chilies last or if you've got the garlic on there or tomatoes, whatever, you know, with each thing we're just building up and building up on those. So things like the garlic, you know, you can start with like a very light kind of a yellow colour, put a tiny, tiny, tiny bit touch of the brown in it, for example, or even a tiny touch of like a purple colour. Sometimes like it's a nice base, and then you can make those, build up those lighter colours as you go on top of that. With this pepper, it's very yellow green. So I'm going to go in with very yellow green and then just put some of the shadow or things on the top. I can't really see too much of that. So, where is the paint? I'm trying to reach it. We're just building up everything as we go. And by this point, you know, once you've done you start to kind of build up in each, it just becomes really enjoyable. And there's no reason, there's some yellows on, there's no reason you can't put all of the base colours on all of the fruit and veg first and then build up each layer. I often suggest doing it like this if you're, say you're just getting back into painting, you know, or if you've just had you've had a little break. Sometimes it's good for us to see one thing completed, and it just gives us that kind of you know, enthusiasm to keep going. Sometimes with this process, if you map everything else out first, you think, oh gosh, everything looks so flat. But that's fine. Once you really get used to the process of acrylics, it's okay because you know it's going to work out, but it can be a bit sometimes overwhelming. So it makes sense to have a go at at doing it this way sometimes as well. So I'm going in with lots of green and lots of yellowy green in here. Much more yellow I've popped in than green. And again, I'm just going to pop in some of these contours. Move on a little bit further, I think, to make that paint a bit thicker. I'm trying to just create a little bit of the contours of it with my brush as I go. So it's very dark when it gets down here, isn't it? So you'll notice patches on yours that are really dark, and that's absolutely fine. That's where you just go in with your really darkest colour on the very darkest bits, and then it all works. And you can always do that as well at the end. You can go back over and think, right, let's have a little look at the end and see, have I got the shadows dark enough on each of the things, or is one as much darker and it shouldn't be, etc. So you can just create that at the end across and do those little checks. And take a little pause there just to make sure everybody's okay. I'm just going to work through this last little bit of some very light greeny pepper. So my first one was a bit put on a little bit thinly. So I'm going to go over, make this paint a bit thicker so it gives a bit of a better coverage. It's quite pasty at the moment. Sometimes we just have to kind of let that dry in between, otherwise it can actually lift paper off. We're not expecting it. I'm just going to go in a little bit with this. Before I start to pop in some of the layers of those colours. And there's quite a few again of different colours on these ones. Just nice to really focus in on the, you know, the final pops of light on it as well. So I'm just looking for a colour now here that's darkish. So I'm looking at my original green here, this sap green, but it's much darker than that. I'm going to go in with a bit of red because I feel that I can feel a little bit of a reddy green in there. Oh, it is a little touch of purpley, isn't it, that? But then also, I'm going to add the tiniest touch of white in there, very small amount. Because I don't want it to be too warm, I want it to be a bit cooler. Sometimes white is good for just a tiniest bit, just helps to make something less warm. So let's have a little go. And as we say, we're just going to explore and experiment with these shades. I don't always know till I just feel like, you know, sometimes if you see a bit of a pop of a colour, then, you know, by all means build that in. I'm actually going to add a little bit of brown to this to make it even darker. Just near the bottom because it feels really dark on there particularly. And behind this pepper as well, it feels really dark. In fact, that bit feels like almost the darkest bit I can see. So I'm definitely going to make that much darker than it is now. I'm just kind of tentatively taking a little step into that to work out how dark it actually is. And we would expect it to be much darker because there's a great shadow cast from the pepper behind it on both sides actually. So I've gone in with a bit more dark brown in this one. So once you've got kind of shadows in, this is where I'm going to add just a touch of red because I feel like we've got a bit of more red in here. So there's a bit of a brush. It's not really bright, it's a muted bright going on there. Still shadowy. I just want to pick out that there is a little bit of red in there without it being too warm. So around it, just to make sure it's not. And put more little bit here. I think where you have almost reflection of the where this top of the pepper is poking over the top of that one. So again, we're focusing on where these shadows are now as well. So this is quite deep in here. So again, this is a really great illustration of what we were saying about, you know, where you get real areas of depth, you get real shadow. So I'm going to go in nice and dark in there. And because this is, you know, standing up a different way, we can really see that happening there. So it's finding another colour dark enough that you're happy, that represents just how dark that is. So I've gone in this time with a bit brown and green, but leaning towards the brown. You could use blue instead, but I'm just having an experiment with this. Maybe use a darker green. It's brown. So it looks a bit harsh at the moment. We'll soften that a bit just by popping this stalk in. So again, it's very yellow-green, this stalk. And then kind of softens that bit now, but I've gone over here a bit too far. So again, this is where it's beautiful, fabulous, because we can just pop over with a bit of a different colour over the top and stop that being so intense. And just come in with a slightly lighter colour down there. So things like, you know, again, the edge of the stalks and things like that, one edge tends to be in the shadow. We can explore that just with different tones. Again, we can explore kind of shadows behind things. Maybe that the stalk's casting a shadow over the top of something else, or another, you know, ingredient or vegetable is casting a shadow over another one. So those are things to keep just being aware of before we go in and actually start to I'm just going to go with a slightly darker one here to create, some of these areas of pepper here. And then we can just start to add, any lights again. So that's what we're looking at. Any nice lighter and brighter colours, any, maybe it's quite yellowy in tone. Looking for those bright areas. Mm. A little bit of mixture. Some of these are yellowy, some of them are a little bit more pastel-y with a bit of a white tint in. Just looking at where I can see them. There's kind of two different shades I'm seeing on there. But again, we all look at these things so differently. Thank goodness. Otherwise, it would be a bit boring, wouldn't it, if we all came out with the same thing. I'm just highlighting a few of these little areas here before I go with any other, I think, a much kind of lighter and brighter. I'm going to go in with a light tint, white and green, I think. Very light, though. Just capture some of these little highlights I can see where the light's catching them. And if we need to make them any brighter, then we can just mix a little bit more in. The thing is, every time we do this, we will see something different. So if we did this tomorrow, you'd see something different in it. It's fascinating how our eyes work and what we see. I'm just going to finish this off by just popping a tiny little bit of a light spot down the middle, just at the top here, just catching the light there. And I'm just going to bring a little bit of green up as well, so it's not so harsh. And then you can just have a little look round, we'll have a little look round your painting, I think. Let's just blend this a little bit more. Oh, it's still a bit damp. Just have a little look around your painting and think, okay, is there anything else? Like, have I got it as dark as it needs to be in different places? Does it? No. So I'm looking at things like, when I'm comparing the very darkest, I'm like looking at here and down here. Are they similar tones? Because that's very dark and that's very dark. I think maybe I'm going to darken just a tad, just the base of that one, because it's not quite as dark as that, but actually it is. So it's those little touches that we can think about, really. And the same again, look around at your lightest little highlights and think, are they comparable? Or do I need to lighten them? And it's like just looking at that composition really across there. I think I just take this to do it. But the best thing also to do is to go and have a little look at these away. So pop it on a bookshelf and have a really good look away from what you've done, because when we're adding texture and lots of little dots and marks and things, it can feel quite intense close up, but actually when you move it away, it feels much softer. So that's a really, really important thing to do. I think that's my final pause, and I hope you've really enjoyed seeing all those fabulous contours and shades and tones and shadows, and just enjoyed colour.